Hi, I'm Eric, and it's actually Friday evening, October 3rd. I'm recording this, and there's been a lot of talk about our president. If you're an American, our president, Donald Trump, and what kind of who is he? What's it all about? And um, people think of him in various ways, but I want to address a certain aspect of this situation that I don't think other people have addressed. And it goes back to a famous Chinese philosopher, Confucius, who said, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their true name. And what I'm saying is that in the person of Donald Trump, what we have here is a personality cult. So, what is a personality cult? It's a situation where there's some charismatic leader who has such a strong presence and has such a strong hold on his followers that they basically, you could say, swear their allegiance to him. And this can be a good thing or it can be not a good thing. So, in the case of, I'm thinking of three famous religious leaders, Muhammad, Jesus, and the Buddha. All three of them had teachings, and the teachings people in that time period when this person taught had such compelling words, things to say, that people basically said they believe in him wholeheartedly. They'll follow him wherever he goes, that kind of thing. And of course, all three religious leaders have had an enormous positive effect on humankind. Generally speaking, positive effect. Although, of course, institutions can go wrong, and so it doesn't always work out so great. But in terms of the personality, many people have found great solace in following the teachings of Jesus, because he's Jesus, and you take Jesus as your personal savior, or you believe there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, and or the Buddha, one takes refuge in the Buddha. So these are examples of positive. You could call them cults if you wish. But there are cases where people can follow somebody and it's not a positive situation. They'll be deceived by somebody, and this person will have a very negative effect in their life. So I'm just gonna think of two specific examples. One was, of course, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was one of his generals described him, that Bohemian corporal, which is not a nice way to describe him, but that Bohemian corporal rose to the height of power so that he was telling generals what they should do. And his orders and his organization and his whole movement ended up as a complete catastrophe for Germany, because at a certain point the German military gave up their oath to the German Constitution and made a personal oath to the Führer, to the leader, to Adolf Hitler. And when they did that, in this movie that I just was watching, it's a very well-known, excellent movie called Downfall in English. It's on YouTube. It's free, actually, and it's very much worth watching, because it's a case study in what happens to people when they're sucked into somebody in a personality cult. So it starts off with this young woman who is she's 22 years old, and she's looking for a job, and I guess there's an ad in the paper that you can work as a secretary for the Chancellor of Germany, Adolf Hitler. And so this young woman shows up. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and Hitler calls her into his office, and he asks her to type something on the typewriter, and he's dictating, and she types as best she can, and then she stops. She's practically in tears, and Hitler comes up to her and looks at the paper, and it's like all kinds of mistakes. But he likes her because he came from Austria, and she came from Munich, which is just kind of over the border. It's like the next neighboring area of the German-speaking world. Munich, and Salzburg is the Austrian city near Munich, And I think Hitler probably liked her because she came from southern Germany. Anyway, he hires her, and she feels very loyal to him. And she's just this innocent woman. She doesn't know. She has no clue about what Hitler is about or what is going on. But he's surrounded by all these generals. And it starts off in 1940. The story starts in 1942 when she's hired, and you flash forward 3 years later. It's now literally it's like April 20th or something, 1945, which is Hitler's birthday, and things are not going well at all. The Russians are on the outskirts of Berlin. They're smashing the German army. And Hitler is in complete denial about all this, and he's ordering his generals around. He says, "Tell Steiner to fight off the Russians, or General Vunk, he can beat them." And his staff, which is with him in the bunker, because they're underground because Germany is being bombed to crap. They're saying, "Mein Führer, Steiner was not able to carry out the attack," and Hitler goes, "It was an order. I demanded them to do this." And the generals are saying, "You don't understand. He doesn't have an army to order around that's going to do anything." But Hitler had such a strong idea of himself and his capability, an overestimation of his capability, that he simply couldn't hear the truth anymore. So that's an example of somebody who, got to a position of power where he was basically the whole country, or most of the country, was pledging allegiance to him. And interestingly enough, this young woman, I think her name was Traudel, she thought, well, maybe I made a mistake here, but my family said don't get involved with the Nazis, but she was young and impressionable, and she fell into it. It's like a cult. Okay, so that's one example. Another example is in San Francisco in the 1980s. There was a guy named Jim Jones, and he had a church. I forget the name of it now, but I was in San Francisco at the time. And it was the people who were in this church were attracted to him because he had a kind of a strong, social component. He said people are getting a raw deal or whatever, that sort of thing. So he's attracting the disaffected type of people, but probably much like what Jesus did, because Jesus, he came from a very lowly background. He was, born in a manger, and people were suffering, and the story goes that he fed the multitude with loaves and fishes. Somehow miraculously he was able to do that, and he was healing the sick, and so he was doing things to benefit mankind, and people followed him for that reason. So in the case of Jim Jones, they had the same idea that he's a good guy, and he's going to kind of lead us to the promised land, so to speak. Because Moses was another example of a personality cult. But so Jim Jones, got this big following, and eventually they decide that they're going to leave the United States and move to Guyana, which is in South America. So he moves to Guyana, and they're like it's like a jungle area. It's like really far away from anything, and the whole community starts becoming more and more toxic, and people are told, you have to fall in line, you have to do what we tell you to do, and so on. And it reached the point where there was, like physical violence being threatened, or maybe in some cases being used. So a U.S. congressman went down there to investigate, and he was killed. So the pressure is really mounting on this Jim Jones and his community. And eventually it reached the point where he said to everybody, well, what we're going to need to do is we're all going to need to commit suicide. So here's some Kool-Aid, and it's got some cyanide in it, and you drink this cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, and within 5 seconds you're going to become unconscious and you're going to die immediately, and fairly painlessly, from what I understand. So that was an example of an extreme, personality cult, where somebody is really really um, deluded themselves, and they bring people along with them, and the whole situation crashes in a really tragic way. So that brings us to a modern politician, and I'll talk about now. Bernie Sanders is he didn't quite make it to that star quality. He gave a lot of speeches. He got a lot of people to really follow him, and they thought he's really great. But he wasn't able to really reach the level of loyalty and stature that Donald Trump it appears to have reached. So in the case of Donald Trump, he came to power with the idea that he's going to clean the swamp and this sort of thing. People have a very negative attitude towards the government, towards the system. And here's this guy, he's a billionaire, but he's on our side. And he says a lot of stuff that really appeals to people, especially people on the religious right, who have strong objections to a kind of liberal aspect of modern American society, the kind of woke culture. And a lot of people really don't like that. So he, and even though his own, if you go back to his beginnings, so he's the son of a rich real estate billionaire, and he inherits his father's fortune, and he becomes a rich real estate billionaire, and but he's not he doesn't have a really saintly reputation, let's say. And it seems like he not only was his real estate deals, like he wouldn't he'd go bankrupt and dump his debts on other people, and they'd get stiffed, but somehow he'd come out clean. Or he wouldn't pay his subcontractors, so they do all the work, and then he doesn't pay them, and then they sue him, and he gets away with it. So he didn't have a really sterling reputation, and from what I read, and then there were other cases. There was something called Trump University, where he was having people pay up to $25,000 to learn the real estate business, and it turns out that it did them absolutely no good. They basically wasted their money. So a lot of his stuff was really pretty shady, and of course he was also a casino operator, and I think his casinos actually failed. But the casino business is a pretty dirty business too, because it appeals to people who are either gambling addicts or people who are desperate financially, and so they'll basically give up they'll sell the last of their assets, hoping that they'll make it big and recover from their reversals, but it only makes it worse. So for that reason, the casino business is something that really is not I don't consider it to be an ethical business. That's my opinion. Anyway, but then he gets this starts this channel, The Apprentice. So he's basically kind of a game show host, and or a real, I don't know, I don't even know what it was. It was you're fired. That's like the main phrase of this channel, his program. So so this is the level of his training to be a statesman, is what I'm saying. A real estate operator, a casino operator, and a game show host. And because he has a gift of persuading people and convincing people that he's on their side, they go for it. And so he developed a very, very strong following. So, and I would call this a personality cult, because it's like when it reaches the point where a person can say something and then they don't follow through, people will rationalize it and say, well, he's playing 5D chess, that sort of thing. Well, it's reached the point now where he's now the president of the United States, and he made promises like he's going to end the Ukraine war with one phone call, and he's going to solve various crises. He's going to bring jobs back to the United States, and America's been kicked around by all these countries, and we're gonna get it all back. Even though the reality is that the U.S. has abused its dollar as the financial asset for the world, people put, the almighty dollar. They would put their savings into dollars, and so the U.S. basically used that. They printed money by the trillions, and as a result, it's like we have this credit card with no limit on it. So for him to say that the United States has been taken advantage of by the rest of the world is a bit rich. Okay, now moving on here, what has happened in his presidency? He started off, he wasn't terribly popular anyway, but at least he did win the election, because Joe Biden, was deeply unpopular, and there was real questions about whether he even had a brain at that point, a functioning brain. So Donald Trump won the election fair and square from what I can see. And then it came down to, okay, let's see what you can do. Let's do something. And it turns out he hasn't created any jobs. He hasn't gotten out of Ukraine, and instead he promised to be the peace president, and he attacked Iran. He's got ships off the coast of Venezuela. He's basically making threats and insults towards the other nuclear superpower, Russia and Vladimir Putin, and he's not looking so good. So recently, things really kind of came to a head with his speech to the 800 generals and admirals. So to me, the impression that I got, and the reason why I'm even making this video, is because he wanted to kind of lock in this loyalty, this personality loyalty to him personally. So he says, okay, all you guys, you're going to come to Quantico, Virginia, and we're going to have a discussion. And he walks into the room, and it's dead silence. And Trump is not used to that, because what happened, if you watch the video, it's like da 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 da. That's the theme song for the presidency. So he gets there to this musical introduction. He gets to the podium, and it's dead silence. And he says, "Gee, it's dead silence in here. Usually I'm used to people clapping for me." And this continues to be dead silence. He says, okay, well, you can do what you want. You can clap if you want. If you don't want to clap, that's fine. And, if you want to leave, you can leave. But, of course, your career and your rank will be ruined. Ha, ha, ha. So what he's doing there is I consider that kind of psychological violence. He's making a threat. He's making a joke, but it's not a joke. Because if you don't do what he says, he's going to mess with you big time. And as a result of his personality, he's attracted people who are essentially yes people, who are willing to, whatever he says, yes, Trump, yes, you're right. So you have people like Keith Kellogg, the retired general, and he goes to Kiev, and he's saying things that are just flatly, ridiculously untrue. And he's saying them with conviction, as if he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and I feel sorry for his press secretary, because she has to say this stuff, and she's like a really pretty face, and it's all show, So everything about Donald Trump is show. It's spectacle. It has no real substance to it. So this is the issue where it appears that Donald Trump has really latched on to this concept of himself as it's like a personality cult. Now, if he had a really, let's say he pulled a Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in the first 90 days, he started a jobs program where he said, okay, we're gonna fix all the potholes, we're gonna fix the infrastructure. We're going to hire all you guys who don't have work to have a job, which it doesn't take a lot of training, but you're going to be able to, you're going to make a decent pay. We're instituting a national health plan. We're going to do away with student debt, And if he had done all those kinds of things, he would have been an extremely popular president. But of course, he didn't do any of that because all he cares about is Israel in his pocket. His his this peace plan in Gaza. It's never mind the genocide of the Palestinians. It's a great real estate opportunity, and it's going to be, who's going to be managing the whole thing? It's going to be Donald Trump. Even though the Palestinians have known for years that the United States is on the side of it. There's no way that the United States is a neutral mediator. Just like he pretends to be a mediator in the Ukraine conflict when he's supplying weapons and intelligence to the Ukraine army. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And most people at this point have seen through it, including the generals, which is the key point. So because they were extremely reserved, to say the least, in receiving him and his speech, and same goes for his his secretary, quote unquote, Secretary of War. There's what I see here is it's a personality cult which is failing. That's what's going on here. And the war that is going on in Ukraine, which he was going to solve and everything was going to be great, it's not going our way, the way of what the U.S. deep state wants. And this is going to create a terrible problem in terms of credibility, both for the United States and for NATO itself. It could be the end of NATO because of this situation. And as a result, because he's not succeeding in these in his endeavors, in his actual plans, not what he says, but what he actually does. It's not working. It's all backfiring. He doubles down instead because he's so convinced of his own superiority. So the question arises, and this is where it becomes really dicey, is because when a president in the United States, when a president is not doing well in the polls, what usually happens? In the case of George W. Bush, he became president in 2000 based on a stolen election. The state of Florida, there was a lot of strange things going on with the vote count there. His brother is the governor of Florida, and a bunch of Republican operatives violently disrupted the recount of the votes. And as a result, it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is dominated by Republicans, and they created a signed opinion saying that George Bush would that they would favor George Bush, that there wouldn't be a recount. So they gave this election to George Bush. And of course, later on it was discovered that, in fact, Florida would have gone to the Democrats and George Bush would not have been president. So he started off on the wrong foot anyway, winning the election unethically. But as time went on, his popularity was falling. And then, miraculously, 9/11 happens. And his popularity went up to like 85%. So, in terms of myself, I never trusted the guy for a minute, and I was part of the 15% that didn't agree. But that's my problem. I'm always Donald Trump says that I'm always right. I'm saying, as Eric, I'm not always right, but I think I'm often more right than I'm not right. I knew that George Bush was a crook, and he stole his election, which was later proved. And I knew that Donald Trump was going to fail his constituents. And lo and behold, the generals that supported him and the military people like Scott Ritter and Doug McGregor and people like that who voted for him, they fervently believed that Donald Trump was going to solve our problems. And I'm just thinking, guys, come on, look at who he is. Forget what he says. Look what he does. Look what he has done. his whole life. He's not credible. Why do you believe anything? As John Mitchell, who is the Attorney General for Richard Nixon, said, don't listen to what we say, watch what we do. And if you watch the actions of Donald Trump, it doesn't work. He's historically it doesn't work, but people buy into it. They listen and they buy into it and they believe the lies. So that's the nature of Donald Trump. As I say, the problem is that as his plans fall through, he becomes more and more desperate, and just like Hitler did, got more desperate, and they double down on what he thinks he can do, and each of his ploys doesn't work. So they sent more weapons to Ukraine, and the Russians are taking them out. They think they were going to bring Russia down using Ukraine as a proxy, and it's not working. And it's so very, very embarrassing, not just for the Democrats who put the current regime into office in Ukraine, but Trump says it's not my war. It wouldn't have happened for me. Well, sorry, but you supplied lethal weapons to Ukraine that Obama wouldn't supply. So, and you're supplying weapons now, and you're talking about supplying, you agreed to supply, you're probably going to supply, Tomahawk missiles. So every time Donald Trump says he won't do something that we wouldn't like, he ends up doing it anyway if it satisfies deep state, prerogatives. So, but the problem is that from a military standpoint, the United States, again, it has it vastly overestimates its capabilities. So you had, Donald Trump says we're the greatest military in the world. Or he said in his speech, I rebuilt the military, so it's the greatest military in the world. And his Secretary of War says we have the greatest military in the world. We're unbeatable. And he forgets that, in World War II, the United States defeated the Nazis. Well, they defeated 20% of the Nazi army. The Soviet Union defeated 80% of the Nazi army. So when the United States says we defeated the Nazis, you defeated 20% of the Nazis, not 100% of the Nazis. So there's that. Then the next war is the Korean War, and the United States goes into Korea. They think they're going to take over Korea, and they're going to invade China, the new People's Republic of China. And the People's Republic of China was a grossly, it was a peasant army. They had very little capability, and yet they basically fought the mighty U.S. Army to a standstill in Korea. Then we think, oh, we're going to beat the Vietnamese, and we listened to 10 years of there's light at the end of the tunnel. We killed all those Vietnamese, and we're gonna keep Vietnam from being a falling domino, and lo and behold, you get kicked out. So that was Vietnam. We had great success with Grenada, which doesn't have an army, and in Panama, which has a tiny army. So and then we invaded Iraq after sanctioning it illegally, for 10 years, and they were able to take over Iraq, but they were not able to hold on to it. And the same thing with Afghanistan. They had initial success, but they weren't able to hold on to it. So the United States does not have a good military record, and any honest military analyst will tell you that. One of the main, there's, I guess you could say, three people that I think of. Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, was high-ranking officer, as a colonel under Colin Powell, and he says the U.S. military is a shadow of what it used to be, and um, Larry Larry Johnson, who is a CIA analyst, says the same kind of thing. So, and probably the most prominent of these is a Soviet-trained analyst named Andrei Martyanov, who now lives in the United States. He moved to the United States when the Soviet Union ended, but he was trained as a military officer during the Soviet times. And he came to the United States, and he's done very thorough study of it, and has written several books about this, saying that the U.S. military is simply not, it doesn't cut it. So, but they think they're going to be able to pick a fight with Iran, which has over the past 20 years or so built up a very formidable military. And in this recent altercation with Israel, Israel tried to create a decapitation strike where they're going to kill all the leaders of the Iranian government, cause a lot of chaos, and they will that's the way they're going to finally take out their arch enemy Iran. But what happened was Iran, after experiencing some reversal in the first couple of days, marshaled its resources, and it caused very, very serious damage to Israel. And I just heard a report today saying that many elements of the Iranian government said that they acceded to a ceasefire too early. They could have really done the job. They would have done to Israel what Israel wanted to do to Iran. So, the U.S. government grossly overestimates itself, and the problem is that the only when you've got a bad hand and the only card you've got left is like you've got one ace or something. The United States has nuclear weapons, and it has a lot of thousands of nuclear weapons, and that is the problem. Michael Hudson, who's the preeminent economist, was talking about this today and saying that if the U.S. gets desperate enough, you have a situation with a Donald Trump who has got such a hubristic view of himself, and can't accept defeat, that he becomes virtually suicidal. It reminds me of a scene in a movie, a Bruce Lee movie, where Bruce Lee is this kind of smallish, Chinese guy, and he's defending a restaurant from some thugs, and the thugs hire a Chuck Norris, who's this really buffed military type guy. He is a black belt, karate type guy, and but Bruce Lee is much faster than him. He's better. And at a certain point, Chuck Norris his knee is broken. He's in serious pain, but he won't give up. And Bruce Lee is looking at him, and Chuck Norris is really angry, but he's partially disabled at a certain point. And Bruce Lee says, "Don't go any further. This is not gonna work." And Chuck Norris charges him. Bruce Lee gets him in a headlock, breaks his neck, and Chuck Norris is on the ground dead. So that is kind of where the United States is going when it thinks that it can defeat countries like Iran or even Venezuela, which it turns out that Venezuela actually has a significant help from China, because China's signed a lot of deals with Venezuela for its oil. And when the United States think it's going to be invading Venezuela to take over its oil, it's going to find it's facing Chinese weapons and Chinese backing. So the United States is really I'm speaking as a country as a whole. It has a very strong view of itself as being superior to everybody else, and Donald Trump is like the epitome of that. That's what I'm getting at here. So I really wonder if we're on such really dangerous ground here, because we're in this situation where we're not winning the rest of the United States has nowhere near the industrial capacity that China has. It has nowhere near the military capability that Russia has from a technological standpoint, and also Russia trains its troops, really, really well. So we're on really thin ice here, basically. And the United States, because it has this overestimation of its capabilities, and Donald Trump is at the heart of that situation. He's like the product of decades of a U.S. Hubris as to its place in the world. We're on difficult terrain here. So that's basically what I would talk about today. If you'd like to support my channel, please subscribe to it, or at least pass on this information to other people. I think it's important for people to understand that what I try to do is I don't talk about things necessarily from a geopolitical standpoint. Well, it is geopolitical, but I talk about it from a geopsychological standpoint. So you have to look at the underlying mindset. What is causing people? Who are these leaders? How do they think? What is their psychological state? And because it all begins with the mind. If you have incompetent people who have a high idea of themselves, it's a mismatch. If you're incompetent and you know it, you're in a lot better position than if you're incompetent and you don't know it, and it's like, you think you're going to study calculus when you can't even do algebra. It's like you're not going to succeed. And if you think you're going to attack Russia and win, or you think you're going to attack China and win, you're headed for a really big disaster. So that's what we need to consider. So please, if you can, like and share my video, and pass this along to some of your friends or family, and hopefully we can get people to think a little more deeply about the issues that are really shaping the world in this huge transition that we're in. So thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you the next time.